Hey everybody, this is AI with Dr. Craig, and I'm delighted to have Dave here all the way from America to share his journey with AI. Good morning, good afternoon to you.
And good afternoon, good evening to you.
Great to have you here. Lisa Adams, the amazing Dynamo, recommended to me that I get hold of you for the great work that you're doing with AI. How about you tell us your backstory, your origin story of how you discovered AI and what you've been doing?
Okay, great. I have been in the tech space really forever. I actually not only predate the internet, but I actually went to the meetings where we debated whether to allow the ARPANET to have commercial traffic or not. So kind of going back a ways. I know I only look like I'm in my 20s.
Indeed.
Um, and I have been skirting the edges of AI for a very long time. Even as an undergraduate, I remember reaching out to the University of New South Wales and having them mail me a mag tape so we could have Prolog on our Unix machines at UC San Diego, where I was studying. So
Mm.
that was one of the very first knowledge attempts at writing a programming language based on knowledge and knowledge management. Um, and then I've done a lot of startups and did various work in user interface design and software development and business and marketing, written a bunch of books. And at this point now, my career has sort of evolved where I teach at the University of Denver, and it is a very interesting time to be a teacher at a university in certainly the US, I'm sure around the world, because all of the sort of large language model AI changes the game.
Mm.
And I think that probably 3 or 4 years ago, students were unaware of this, but it all just exploded on the scene. And I even now get ads from software developers saying, we have software that will help you not get busted by your professor if you want to have AI write your papers. And I'm like, I'm sort of on the other end of that equation. I'm not sure I'm your target market here. And, for the last 3 quarters, I have had to remind students the parameters around what I believe is acceptable and great use of AI and what is unacceptable use. And just to sort of have that as a starting point here is
Mm.
copying and pasting is almost always a bad idea, but using it for brainstorming and coming up with new ideas and maybe having it pick apart your arguments and having it suggest improvements to a presentation or something, all of those are marvelous uses. And it's amazing how powerful this is. But again, to reiterate, copy and paste, not okay.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of discussion around whether we meaning general education, just blocks it, finds trackers to identify if AI has been used in a student assignment. And the energy's on the limitation, the control of the resource rather than harnessing it. Would you agree?
I think that there's definitely a lot of enthusiasm for that from some people in higher education,
Mm.
and I would suggest that they are misguided. I think that, we have seen this extraordinarily aggressive adoption of AI technologies into things like Microsoft Word and Google Mail, and we're not going to be able to put that proverbial genie back in the bottle. So instead of saying, oh, I wish students didn't use computers, I think a much smarter strategy is, the same as when calculators show up, is what can we do to harness these technologies to make them part of the goal of our educational program, which is to teach you how to do things.
Mm.
I mean, years and years and years ago, I remember a colleague said to me that we don't learn how to program printers, we just print. And I always thought that was a really interesting observation, because a lot of what we do in the very early stages of technology is essentially teaching a printer how to print. But what we really want to do is just print a document. So then we can focus on what we're saying and our arguments and how we present our information and how we try to convince the reader or the audience or maybe the investors for a business or something. So the more that we have the ability to use AI technologies to expand our skills, and let us step back from the grunt work of, oh, how do you spell that word? Let me go look it up. You know, we shouldn't have to do that. It's 2024.
Mm. So for students and for educators thinking about implementing or dipping their toes into AI use for teaching and learning, particularly at the higher education level, where do you think are some good starting points?
I think that one of the best starting points, and I think this is something that every student and teacher will resonate with, is when you're facing a blank screen. The
Mm.
idea that you can ask a bot, I have to write about this subject. What are the key ideas in that area? What are the key points? What are the major philosophies? What are the reasons this happened? What were the causes of this event?
Mm.
But then that becomes like having a tutor. So you wouldn't say to your tutor, can you write this essay for me? Because they'd say, no, that's not my job. But you might ask them, well, I'm kind of drawing a blank. I did read the chapter, but I'm just drawing a blank. And they might be like, well, what happened between these two people? And do you think that influenced this event occurring? Oh, yeah, that's good. That's one point, you
Mm.
know, and having tools that can do that at any point in any language, even when it's 2 in the morning and you're just exhausted and you just can't pull it together and it's due the next day at noon. You have a piece of software that's always there and it's patient and you can yell at it and it's just going to say, oh, okay, I wish you didn't talk that way. And it will just wait for your next query. It's remarkable.
And remarkably patient too, doesn't have the frustration of having to go over things more than once.
Yeah, although I suspect that someone's going to write an impatient AI where it's going to be like, you asked me that last week. Come on.
Like SARS from Interstellar, who has the humor setting you can change.
Yeah.
So right now, can you give us an idea? Because I've had a look at one of your blogs where you're showing how to use Gemini inside Google Slides, and it
Mhm.
worked mostly. And there are some things that didn't happen as you requested. So tell us about some of the things that you're doing in your role with AI or roles.
Right. So I view most AI at this point as having an intern who is working for me, and they don't really know my job. They don't really know what the sort of key ideas for my industry, but they're always willing to go and do the grunt work and to look things up and to recommend things. And they're going to get it wrong occasionally, but that's okay. So I always have Microsoft Copilot essentially. I always have it open and I'm just endlessly asking it questions like, who directed this movie? What year was this book published? Summarize this book, things like that. And I never paste anything in, but it's so wonderful to not have me have to go and do all of these searches and synthesize all of this information. And so I'm working with a colleague at the university, and we're developing actually, I guess we're revamping a class that is a little bit long and old. And so we're reinventing it with much more modern. It's a class on film and novels. And we work with an AI and we just keep asking it, you know, what novels have this as a primary theme, were written in the last 20 years and have these characteristics. And then it'll just, here's a list of 7. It's like, oh, that one, that's interesting. Let's look a little more on that one. And it's, giving us the ability to choose from a sort of data pool far larger than either of our experience.
And do you find that it's hallucinating or giving you rubbish?
Very, very rarely. I think that the one of the keys to avoiding having the sort of bad results is to have fairly specific prompts.
Mm.
And you always need to double check things. I have definitely had it where I'm just like, I'll ask for a synopsis of a movie and it just doesn't understand that movie. So it picks a synopsis of a different movie. And I'm like, no, 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 this one directed by this person released in this year. And it'll be like, yeah, that's the one I'm talking about. And then it'll give me the wrong synopsis again. So again, it's like an intern, or I like to think that this is kind of like some men where they are very confident in their inaccuracies And if you just judge what they're saying based on their level of confidence in what they're saying, you assume they're a genius. And then you actually start doing some homework and you're like, oh, they're wrong about this. And that's not accurate at all. So I feel like AI is kind of like that. And apologies if I'm opening up a can of gender worms here, but it's very confident in the information it gives you, and it's on us to double check that it's accurate. And I have had students turn in AI generated content that was wrong and they didn't check it. And that was like, well, this is how I knew it was AI.
Right. Yeah.
So,
The onus is on the human to check it. I was using Perplexity to do some searches and do some trend analysis, and I did ask for some sources of information, and it was important that they were right because I was going to be presenting. And so I went and looked at the sources, and they just didn't exist. The file links didn't; they went nowhere. And I told it, "Hey, these are rubbish. They don't exist." And it answered and said, "Oh, I'm sorry about that. Let me try again." Generated some different results which actually existed, which were kind of online, but not really.
yeah. And it's not like it's genuinely sorry.
No.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about the way Microsoft's coded Copilot, which is sitting on top of GPT-4 and GPT-4o, is that it tends to give you citations. And I always, whatever AI I use, and I bounce between all the major ones, including I like Perplexity, but I'll say, cite your sources.
Mm,
And if it's an AI that can't answer that query, it's just like, yeah, I'm going to be relying on you less
right.
because I want to know where your information comes from. I don't need to know the training model, and I don't need to know that well, we read all of Wikipedia. It's like, I don't care about that. But if you're going to give me a fact, this is academia. If you're going to give me a fact, if you're going to give me a quote, show me where that comes from. And I will check. I mean, you should check. If you're going to quote someone, make sure they said it, which I
Mm,
realize flies in the face of the entirety of social media, but still, do your homework.
mm. And what do you think about the features that are built in now, Dave, around vision, listening, and talking?
I like it. I was actually experimenting with Amazon has a new shopping chatbot called Rufus, and you can just talk to it. And so I was experimenting with it yesterday, and I said, based on user reviews, recommend a book on making your own cocktails. And
Nice.
it gave me a couple of books. And then I said, okay, so for this book, what are the most common complaints people have? And it could understand all of that. And it's just like, that's amazing. I could never have done that, even at a bookstore with a very knowledgeable clerk.
Mm,
They'd be like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess one person said that it didn't have enough pictures. Okay, but this is now data points of potentially thousands of people.
right.
And that was all just a voice. I was talking to it and it was giving me text output. And I don't know if you've tried Pi, Pi. It's another AI
Mm,
app that you can get for your iPhone. I assume it's also on Android. And I've heard that the development team is now part of Microsoft, but it's actually really interesting because it ends every answer with a query and you can talk back and forth. So I have friends that use it for brainstorming, like while they're driving, they'll just say, I have this challenge. How do I approach it? And it'll say, well, here's a couple of things to consider. Have you thought about this? Oh, that's a good point. So if I did that, then, and it becomes a dialogue. And then I think that becomes like having an intern that's actually in the room rather than on the other side of the globe.
yeah, that's really good that it ends with a query to generate more thinking and to maybe access a piece of knowledge or an idea that we haven't thought of that could really deepen the learning.
Yeah. And then, the other half of what you asked was about images. And I guess
Mm,
there's the sort of vision part, which I think has lots of amazing potential for medical, for industrial, for security. And then there's the image creation part, which I'm quite fascinated by. And I talk to a lot of artists, some of whom are like, this is really interesting. I want to explore it. And others are very fearful of it. But my experience is that most people that are using AI generated images never had a budget to hire an artist in the first place. So it's not lost business or lost revenue. It's
Mm,
just more people recognizing we don't have to all use the same clip art or photo library. We can create images for our specific tasks, and artists for the entire history of art, artists have seen someone else's work and said, wow, I want to incorporate that into what I do.
mm.
And I think AI is a little closer to that than the sort of blatant copy and steal that people accuse it of, because it's synthesizing multiple items. So
Right.
might not be a popular opinion, but that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's going to be some legislation around that or regulation around what you can produce and how you need to reference then an original source. And it just needs a few test cases, I guess, to go through and figure it out how people can get their IP protected or whether it just can't be.
Yeah, and there are obvious problems with it. There are obvious risks of manipulation and
Mm,
fake news and propaganda and outright, character assassination and worse.
mm,
But I would argue that AI doesn't change that very much because Photoshop was doing that before that. And
right.
before Photoshop, people were manipulating photos in a darkroom,
Mm,
so it is again an incremental danger that, yeah, it makes it easier. And so that's something we need to think about. I don't think we should just proceed without contemplating and trying to have guardrails on the risks. But, anyone who says we shouldn't do this or it shouldn't generate human faces or something, it's just like, it's not going to happen. You might wish it would not happen, but it's not going to change the way things are. And so now it's sort of half, we as a society need to come to terms with it. And we have had for a long time to realize that photos are no longer actually, proof of something occurring.
yeah, that's right.
That's been true for decades.
Yeah. Dave, I'm wondering if you've seen at these early stages anything around digital divide, access, equity issues.
Yeah, and that's something that we also really wrestle with at the university because, as much as I say don't copy and paste, if English is not your first language, having a tool that can rewrite your, poorly translated, you might be fluent in 6 languages, and English isn't one of them, but
Mm,
having tools that can improve your English submissions, is that fair? Is that giving you access to a space where previously you didn't have access? So there's equity side there. There's issues with people that might be physically or mentally challenged in various ways. And so having tools that can assist them gives them an enormous promotion or step forward. But then the other half of that is it fair to all of the other students? And this is, and a problem that professors endlessly and teachers endlessly deal with, which is, I want to give you every opportunity for you to be successful, but I also have to be fair to everyone else. So if everyone else has to turn it in by the deadline, it's not fair for you to get 5 extra days.
mm,
So yes, I think that AI offers up some really interesting opportunities to have us have a little bit more level playing field. But I think that we also need to be judicious in making sure that that's a fair advantage and it doesn't become an unfair advantage.
yeah, that's good. Dave, just to wrap up, if you were to look out 5 years from now, everything going well with AI, what would you see in a classroom?
I would see that students will have personal tutors, and the tutors will track where they are and where they need to be.
Mm,
And maybe in the classroom, they'll still focus on teachers and lesson plans and all of that. But especially when they're working at home or doing homework or something, that's poised to have a pretty revolutionary change. I mean, when we went to school, we didn't have someone sitting next to us at our desk 24/7 saying, well, let me explain that to you a different way. And so even with things that are, traditionally more challenging, like physics or math, to be able to say, here's an equation I'm supposed to solve, and it might say, well, I'm not going to solve it for you, but let me show you some things that will help unlock this mystery for you. That could be fantastic.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you doing this.
You bet. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, Craig.
What's the best way for someone to reach out and connect with you?
Probably through my site, askdavetaylor.com.